We were dying to go to sleep. So when we started doing like all the tours, we were catching the show at the Lido de Paris, the Moulin Rouge. We tried to be like regular tourists and walk up down the Champs-Élysées, but they said, Elvis, you can walk around in Paris because they don't do stars like they do stars any place else. They leave you alone. And we said, good. We went for a walk on the Champs-Élysées, and you'd have thought France de Gaulle had come, Charles de Gaulle had come there, whatever his name was. And because the people hit us, and we had to fight our way to a movie theater, buy a ticket, and go in. And we called our driver that had the limousine. He'd come around and met us at the theater. We went straight through the theater, got the limousine, and left. So we didn't try that anymore. But we'd go shopping at different little places and catch the shows, and it became a daily. I remember one time we were riding up the Champs-Élysées between the Arc of Triumph and the Eiffel Tower. And Rex Mansfield and Elvis and I started singing a trio of some number. And we just kept singing the same song over and over again. And we just going from one end of the street to the other one. And finally, you know, we said, Lamar, get out and go cancel the show. We were going to Lido show at night, so we had Lamar go in and cancel it because it was more important. We were enjoying ourselves singing, just riding up and down there from the Champs-Élysées to the Eiffel Tower, down the Champs-Élysées, the Eiffel Tower, between the Arc of Triumph, you know. We just rode and sang and sang. And then the girls from the Lido show would come over and see us. And I remember one night they called, the theater called and said, could you have the girls come over? And we said, well, what's the problem? They said, well, we really would like to start the show. They'd been there all night. Elvis loved to watch the movies on the post, and he actually studied the actors. You know, he noticed that actors with dark hair lasted longer. His hair was naturally light, but after his first movie, Love Me Tender, he had it dyed black. I think it was a couple of months, maybe 6 weeks or so before we left Germany. We were having a little party at Elvis's house there at 14 Goethestrasse. I'll always remember that. And a guy from the Air Force that was a friend of ours brought this young lady over, and it was Priscilla. She was 14 years old at the time. And Elvis, I think, was just dumbfounded. I mean, he didn't hardly speak to anyone else the whole evening. He was just talking to her. And when she left that evening, he called me over and he said, Charlie, did you see the structure of her face? It's almost like everything I've ever looked for in a woman. So I think he decided that night that Priscilla was going to be his wife. It was a pretty good plan because it worked out. Elvis was getting ready to record his first album after getting back, and he asked me to go along to Nashville. When I asked him what I would do while he was busy recording, he said, well, we could sing All We'll Be Home Again like we did on the ship. That'll be the first full duet I've ever put on an album. We had harmonized our way through the Army. We were on our way to Nashville and to another step in our relationship as musicians. From that time, for well over a decade, life was a series of phenomenal events. Elvis interrupted the recording session to go to Miami to appear live with Frank Sinatra. He'd been out of the Army only about a month. After Nashville, we would embark on an incredible journey to California by train to do a movie. Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, had reserved 2 railroad cars for Elvis and all the guys. One was a sleeping car and the other was a private dining car. If you can picture this scene, all along the tracks, at every little train station and crossroads, people stood to see and wave as Elvis and the train went by. Even though the train didn't stop there, they knew Elvis was on that train, much like the political campaigns years ago. Elvis was very quiet whenever he looked out. As I look back over my life, I don't think anything that happened to me was by chance. From 1961, I guess it was, to 1966, I used to get tired of sitting around the studio when they was doing movies because you go there, you get there at 8 o'clock in the morning, you don't do anything till 5 o'clock in the afternoon, then you go home and take a break. But, so I talked to Elvis about me going out and working some nightclubs with Jimmy Wakely. And because I'd known Wakely on the old Ozark Jubilee and I'd sung some with him. And so Elvis said, all right. And so I would go out and work these tours in Las Vegas, Lake Tahoe, and Reno with Wakely, and then come back in and do like the soundtrack for a movie thing with Elvis, and then we'd go somewhere else with Wakely. I remember one time we came in, and I walked in through the gate, and I said, and Elvis and them were loading up the bus. I said, have a heart, I just got off the road. And Elvis said, shut up, load your stuff, and let's go. So we loaded up, and Elvis had just gotten this 1963 Dodge mobile home. And we always followed it behind with a station wagon full of a trailer with all our clothes in it, so it wouldn't be so much stuff in the bus.
So kind of tell me, what was it really like to travel on the road with Elvis?
I know we'd drive sometimes, and we'd stop and we'd spend the day in a hotel because we'd drive all night long. And then get up that night, and sometimes Elvis would drive 100 miles and say, let's check back in another hotel. I don't feel like that. And we'd stop on the side of the road, and we'd throw footballs, and we'd do everything. But what Elvis was, he was really anxious, really, to get back home. That's one of the reasons he got the bus, so he could have everybody together and we could all go home together. I remember one time we was coming through Arkansas, and we was listening to George Klein on WHPQ radio. And he played a song by Tom Jones called "The Green, Green Grass of Home." And that's the first time we had heard that. We had been out in Hollywood, I think, for 3 movies in a row, so we hadn't been home in probably 9 months, you know. And we listened to that, and every one of us started tearing up a little bit. And so Elvis pulled over to the next phone booth. He said, Joe, call George, tell him to play that song again. So Joe called George. He played it again. Elvis stopped at the next phone booth to call him, tell him to play it again. And this went all the way from over there in West Memphis, Arkansas, well, the other side of West Memphis, actually, so all the way through Memphis. So we got home. He was calling. Every time we'd run in the phone booth, call George, tell him to play that song again. And George would announce on the radio, he'd say, the king and the boys are on the way in, boys and girls, you know, and boom, 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 tell about it. So he was giving them a running description of us coming in and listening to Tom Jones. And then Tom Jones later became a very close friend with us. Very close friend.
We were down in the den. I think we were playing records and listening to new demos for an album Elvis was going to do. And Charlie came in. I didn't realize he was, you know, so short. And I was glad to see him because that made me, I used to be the shortest guy in the group, and along comes Charlie, and he's the shortest guy. So I was very glad to see Charlie Hodge, but Elvis said, George, this is Charlie Hodge. I met him in the Army. He used to be the Forty River Boys. I said, yeah, I remember you. Used to come out with that coat case, and we all laughed. And Charlie said he'd heard Elvis talk about me quite a bit. So you're the disc jockey from Memphis, a good friend of Elvis? I said, yeah. And Charlie and I kind of hit it off pretty good.
Elvis always would dress for all occasions and everything. We had, driving across the country, we had jumpsuits with our name on it.
He had a great time with the truckers, didn't he?
Elvis drive the bus going across, and these truckers would recognize him. Going across, and they'd blow them big air horns, and Elvis would blow his horn, man. And then he'd racing them across country. Of course, it wasn't a race, but he had fun. He was playing with the truckers, you know. He had his own truck, customized, naturally. But he dressed special always. Elvis was proud of who he was, and never wore a disguise that I know of at all. And he would always dress the way Elvis was supposed to look. So he was dressing for the fans every day.
A lot of pride.
Yeah, a lot of pride in what he had done, what he had accomplished, and who he was. And Elvis could dress, nobody else would look that good in those clothes, but he would look fantastic, you know. You know, it's funny, when we'd leave Los Angeles going to Hollywood, or coming to Memphis, and we'd leave and nobody'd know what time we left. But somehow, when we got to Graceland, even if we flew, it's not going bus, if we left tonight, caught a plane, and it's midnight here, and 6 o'clock in the morning we were landing in Memphis, there'd be a crowd there waiting. Somehow the fans knew we had left, and they passed the word to each other. The same thing, we'd go to L.A., there'd be nobody around the house in L.A., we'd leave late at night on a plane, go to L.A., get to the house, crowd of people standing out there when we got there. They kept in touch with, they had their own underground.
They knew where you were.
They knew where we were, yeah. When we'd get into a town, we'd be on tour, and we'd get off the plane, sometimes they'd have 2 or 3 Cadillac limousines there, and Elvis was getting one, and Dr. Nicopoulos and myself were getting another one, and somebody else another one. Then we always had the bus for everybody else. And if there were any fans outside the airfield there when we went out, they didn't know which one to follow. Because Elvis could be in the front one, he could be in the middle one, he could be in the back one. Unless you could really get a good look at them. And the way those cars were moving, because the police were always the greatest anywhere we went. They gave us a police escort. So when we left the place, we was already doing 30 or 40 miles an hour when we hit the highway, you know. But Elvis, we did that ever so often. You know, Elvis would be in one car, I'd be in another car with Dr. Nicopoulos, and then you couldn't tell. It might not be anybody in those cars. Elvis might have been on the bus also with the rest of the guys.